Hey everyone, it's Ardith, and today I'm here with a different kind of video, one with no cards. Today I'm going to be talking about different storage and organization tips that I use in my craft room. This video is a collaboration with Justine, and she has even more tips for you, so once you finish watching my video here, be sure to stop over on her channel and watch hers as well. I've put the link to her video in the description below. So let's dive right in and talk about ink storage and refilling ink pads. My favorite inks are my Catherine Pooler inks. I love the wide color selection and I love all the different properties they have. I store them in this Organize More ink pad holder. Catherine's inks are oval ink pads, and that gives me a bit of wiggle room in each area for them, and I tilt them all to the right, which satisfies my need for order, but it also serves a good organization purpose. If you notice, there are a couple in here that are turned to the left, and that means that when I've gone to use them, they were dry and they needed to be re-inked. This system is easy and it helps me keep track of which ones I need to re-ink. Once I have a few of them, then I spend some time re-inking a bunch of them all at once. I love to ink blend and use direct-to-paper techniques with my ink pads, and that means they can become dry over time. It's definitely a good idea to have the re-inkers, especially for your most used inks, so you can continue to get great results. My Rockin' Red ink pad is dry, and when it's dry you can tell because it feels a bit sticky when you tap your stamp into it, and you can see I'm not getting a very even impression. To re-ink, I just take my re-inker and I press on it and put little drops of ink all over the ink pad. These drops will sit on top of the ink pad, and you can rub them in with a credit card or with the tip of the re-inker itself, but be careful not to rip the ink pad. I tend to put quite a bit of ink into it so that I can make sure it's really juicy, but sometimes it's too juicy, and when you stamp you'll lose some details or it won't be crisp. So I just take a piece of white cardstock and I rub the ink pad over it, and I create a red piece of cardstock that I'll save for another project. Then when I ink up that stamp again, I get a perfectly crisp and clear impression. For my mini inks, I follow a similar process. I store my minis in these little acrylic drawers, and I can fit 14 into each one, so they're quite handy and I can pull them out and use a whole rainbow at a time. These are much smaller ink pads, and depending on how you use them, they may need to be re-inked more often. And yes, you should double check to make sure that you have the right re-inker on the right ink pad. I press the drops of ink onto the ink pad and I just put a stripe of the ink on the white cardstock. The pressure of pressing it down on the paper removes excess ink, but it also helps those ink drops to absorb into the ink pads and not just sit on top. And then I move on, and as I work through, I end up with panels of cardstock that have stripes of color on them that I can use for backgrounds for future cards. So this is really a great way to get two things done at once. I'm not wasting my ink, but I'm also not having too much ink sitting on my ink pads. My next tip is about swatching new inks. I've had my ink swatches in this old business card holder from my previous corporate life. This is a similar idea to the coin pockets that some people use with the little 2-inch squares. But since I had this already, I use this and it gives me a nice big piece of the color to work with. I also have what I think is the best matching Copic number marked down next to it. Each of my swatches is the size of a business card, which I think is about 2 inches by 3 inches. I put a piece of 1-inch post-it tape along the bottom half, and then I blend the new ink color on the top half. When I remove the post-it tape, I have a nice white area where I can write the name of the company and the color onto it. You could do labels, of course, but I find it faster and easier just to handwrite them. To find the best matching Copic marker for each color, I use my hex chart to try and find a good match, and then I do little swatches to compare several different colors to find the color that matches best. I let them dry a bit to be sure to get a true color, and once I've determined what I think the best one is, I put a little square of that color onto the ink swatch and I write the number of the marker. I've used this swatching system for a number of years, and I find that unless I'm looking for a Copic number, I don't refer to it very often. But one thing I do refer to very often is this hex chart for my Copic markers that Sandy Allnock developed. I have it on one piece of cardstock and I keep it near my markers so that it's easy to reach for. and I find it really useful, so I thought that maybe I would try a similar one-sheet swatch of all my Catherine Pooler inks, and maybe that would be more useful to me than having to pull out that business card holder. This is just another option for swatching. It's important that you store and organize your craft space in a way that works for you. So I created a grid of 6 by 10 1-inch squares, and then I created a little stencil of a square by cutting a square die out of a piece of acetate. Then I just blended the different ink colors through the squares on the chart. I found that I needed to clean the acetate between most of the colors, and I needed to clean the front and the back of the acetate so I wasn't getting any contamination as I'm moving through the rainbow. This is the rainbow order that I keep my inks in my holder, so I find it helpful to have it in the same order. Next, I'm handwriting the names of the colors on, and then I'm going back and picking up the Copic colors from my other swatch book. I'm actually really excited about this new swatch, and I think it's going to be really easy to pick up and use and get ideas for color combinations. The shape is a little awkward, but I figure I can cut them apart if I change my mind and decide that I want to have separate little swatches, or I could even just cut this sheet in half and glue it together so that I've got a front and a back, and that may give me a better shape. Of course, now that I've gone and done this, you can bet that Catherine will release new colors and I'll have to do it again. That's okay, it will be totally worth it. My next tip is for stamp and die storage. Here's a photo of some of my stamps and dies. I store them by company, and then I use a color coding system on the cards to distinguish different types of sets and make it easier for me to find what I'm looking for. Here's the last Ellen Hudson release, and this is the process I used to organize them and put them away. First of all, I keep the coordinating dies with the stamps in the same pocket. I trim my pockets down because I don't like that flap on the top, but that is completely up to you. One of the nice things about Ellen stamps and dies is they come with cards that I use right in my system, and they come in the stamp pockets that I use as well, so it's really just a matter of trimming them down and combining the coordinating dies with their stamp sets, and adding the color coding. This first example is what I call an image set, and I don't use color coding on those. The next one is a floral set, and I use pink for florals. I use green for sentiments, yellow for backgrounds, gray for standalone dies. These are all just Copic marker stripes that I make with the broad end of the marker. So now there's that whole new release all set up in their pockets. But what happens when I have different sizes of stamp sets or die sets? I've got some large and small ones here from a recent order from Concord and 9th. These are things that will not fit into those regular size pockets. Small sets are easy. I just keep them in the regular size pockets. I consider these shapes to be a background, so I used a yellow stripe across the top. For my stamps and dies, I do create labels with my label maker, and I put them in the right corner. For this set, the cover plate would fit into a normal envelope, but that long hex strip will not. I do like to use the company's cards that come with the products if I can, but sometimes when you peel back the dies, they sometimes leave a glue residue on it, and it's sticky and it makes it hard for the dies to slide in and out. I just put some clear tape over those sticky areas, and that seems to solve that problem. The next set is 6 by 6 inches. It obviously won't fit into a smaller pocket, but it's too short for one of the larger pockets. So what I do for these sets is I cut a card to the size of a large envelope, and I basically just extend the packaging it came with because it has the name printed on it already, and that saves me creating a label. This is a sentiment set, so it gets a strip of green Copic marker at the top, and then it's ready to be put away. I keep all my pockets and magnet sheets in a drawer, and I cut lots of regular size white cards for the backers, and I keep them in the drawer as well. Next up is an alphabet die set. There are an awful lot of dies in this, and I find that they flip and flop all over the place when I try to use a regular magnet sheet with them. I know some people solve this problem by not cutting apart their alphabets, and they keep them together, but I don't like having all the extra letters around, so I do like to cut them apart. It also allows me to do inlaid die cutting if I want to make up words. I still have some of these old magnet sheets that we used in the plastic storage binder boxes back in the day. I'll check to see if I can find them, and I'll link them below if I do. They're very thick, and they also have a much stronger magnet than some of the thinner magnet sheets. What I find is when I put an alphabet onto these, they don't slide, they stay where they're put. and that is so much easier. When you're sliding these things in and out of a pocket, you don't want to be catching the dies and having them fall all over the place and creating a big mess. I'm not going to cut it all apart here, but when I'm using an alphabet die set, I keep it in alphabetical order, just so that I can see if I'm missing a die and I need to find it somewhere on my desk. I will cut out just a couple of letters so that you can see that once you put them on here, they don't slide around. I've done this with most of my alphabets or any die set that has a large number of dies in it. Now let's talk about some standalone die storage. Here is one of my newest and best tips for basic shape dies that I use all the time. For my circles, I've been keeping them organized with a simple binder ring. I don't worry about keeping them in order. I just search for the one I want, open the ring carefully, and pull it out. This seems to be working well with these circle dies that have a frame on them. And I've even put my old circles without frames on another ring, so I can easily tell them apart. Since I use circle dies quite often, I keep both sets in a little square box in a drawer close to my Gemini Junior. You can do this with squares and rectangles too, all those dies that you want to have close at hand. Now I have just a few little miscellaneous tips about other items in my craft room. I'll start with my blender brushes, and I apologize, I don't generally film at this angle, so it was a bit awkward. These are old Stickles containers. I used to have tons of colors of Stickles, and now I really focus on the clear ones. I think you can see them there on the left side. So I had all these containers laying around, and you can see that they're hollow all the way through, and they fit perfectly into my little cubby, which is just ahead of me when I'm working at my desk. If I stack two of the containers together, they are the perfect height for holding my blending brushes. Next, remember back in the day when all we had was wooden stamps? I bought these fridge bins at the time because they were very shallow and they helped me to keep my wooden stamps organized in my Alex drawers. Now I don't have very many wooden stamps anymore, but I have kept a few old favorites, especially for my church Christmas cards. I store them in these trays and you can see that they stack very nicely and they can sit on a shelf and all be together. And since I have a few of those bins, I also use one for my embossing powders, which I keep in an Alex drawer. I put swatches of my embossing powders on the lids because often how it looks in the jar is different than how it looks when it's embossed. You can see that I started by putting small dots on, and then I realized I could put a much bigger dot and get a better sample of what the powder looks like. These clear things are the lids of the Stickles containers, and obviously they're not necessary in this container, but I needed a place to keep them, and they do help to keep the embossing powders a little better organized and lined up. Finally, this is another kitchen bin. I'm not sure what you would use it for in a kitchen actually, but it is perfect for storing finished cards. It has a hinged lid, and that means when I travel with the cards, they're covered, and the bin is rigid, so everything is well protected inside. I have two of these, and they hold about 100 cards each with envelopes. They stack as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's always fun to share tips for storage and organization. Storage tips are often very personal, based on what you have in your craft room, and what works for you will be different than what works for me or what works for someone else, but the more we share, hopefully the more we learn. I've linked to my craft room tour video above, and you can take a look at that if you're interested. And then don't forget to go watch Justine's video for even more tips for storage in your craft room. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.